Beautiful. And everyone can still hear me?
Loud and clear.
All right, let's do this. So, PEMF, pulsed electromagnetic field therapy. I like to start here because I don't know about you guys, but I definitely get a lot of people coming in, and there's a little bit of fear around the PEMF machine. So I feel like if we're doing our job well, we should encourage and be able to explain in such a way that allows us to get to customer buy-in, meaning we kind of remove that barrier of entry, which is sometimes this fear, not knowing what this machine is going to do. So how do we respond to this in a way that allows us to get them not only to try it, but to really trust us and trust in the therapy and give it a real shot, whether that's, buying a session or buying a package. Why isn't, there we go. So I like to think about bringing it back to something that's relatable, which is the energy we get from Mother Earth. A strong electromagnetic field equals vitality. So what do we know about the Earth? The Earth emits a pulsing electromagnetic field at 7.8 hertz. This natural energy field, combined with around 8 million global lightning strikes per day, allows our planet to sustain life. So much like the Earth, our bodies are electromagnetic. Our brains use electromagnetic signals to communicate with every bodily system. So essentially, we know our shorthanded kind of pitch is usually that the PEMF is allowing us to supercharge our cells. So on a very basic level, if our cells have enough electrical charge, the body will be able to heal itself. I recently watched the Earthing documentary that I think I've spoken about on a previous call as well, that has really helped me understand what the PEM machine is basically giving us. It helped me draw parallels from like the natural healing forces, and then also like what is kind of being pulled out of that understanding about our Earth and how PEMF is kind of taking that and delivering it to the patient. The founder of Earth Inc. said a quote that really resonated with me. He says, "Health is not something we really have to work on, we just have to let it be." And I read a post recently from Hamid, if you guys are familiar with him, he's a member. His new Instagram handle, he has some really good stuff on there. And he wrote this, and I thought it was an interesting take and it offered a different perspective. He wrote, "Humans are the only species that rely on others' opinions to decide what we need to eat, how we should give birth, or how to breathe." Think about it. The deer don't hire health coaches or nutritionists. The rabbits don't have doulas or midwives when they give birth. And the lions don't take breathwork classes to learn how to regulate their CO2. So not that we want to give people the message that like, you don't need to work on your health, because honestly, most people do. But the point of this statement is that when we are putting our bodies in helpful, advantageous states, lifestyle choices we're making, at that point, it's not something you no longer have to work on. Health, you can just let your health be. So tying it back to grounding and earthing and what we're getting from our PEMF charge is the Earth's surface has a limitless supply of mobile electrons that gives the ground we walk on a natural negative electric charge. When you touch your body to the ground, it dissipates static electricity and extraneous environmental electrical charges that are on you. At the same time, you receive a charge of energy in the form of free electrons, and your body synchronizes with the natural frequencies of Earth. So the point of this slide is basically to say that while we're not grounding, while we're on the PEMF machine, I'm going to play a video on the next slide, and hopefully we'll be able to tie in why it's so important in our modern world, because we're not getting a lot of contact with the ground, all the voltage that our bodies may be carrying, and why our electromagnetic field is off, and what that can mean for our health.
We can't hear the volume, just so you know.
You can't hear that?
No.
I don't know what to do about that.
Balance.
Can you hear it now?
Yes.
We get charged inside of our bodies.
Right,
We
let
get
me start
electrically
over.
charged. With TV programs, have to be grounded. If they're not, two things can happen. You get snow on the screen, the picture is terrible, and the other is you get a knock on the door from the Federal Communications Commission because the signal is disturbing aircraft communication. It leaks into the environment.
Just as ungrounded signals wreak havoc on radio communications, there's growing concern that because we are not grounded, we absorb tremendous amounts of electromagnetic radiation from our modern devices. EMF stands for electromagnetic field.
We are all immersed in electromagnetic fields, from Wi-Fi, from the wiring in our homes, and it disturbs our electrical balance. We get charged inside of our bodies. We get electrically charged. Some people have as much as 20 volts on their bodies, and that's not good for you.
But in our natural state, the Earth has a built-in system to ground our bodies.
Unbeknownst to us, we live inside a battery. The surface of the Earth is charged negatively, and the ionosphere, which is a layer of the atmosphere about 60 miles up, which is ionized by the sun, meaning that the rays of the sun are so strong that they split the molecules into a positive charge and a negative charge.
The sun spews out electrons. They come to the Earth, they hit the ionosphere, they charge the ionosphere, and periodically the ionosphere releases lots of electrons. It's called lightning.
The negative charge are transferred to the surface of the Earth through lightning mainly, and the positive charge stay 60 miles up.
The surface of the Earth is electrically conductive. And wherever you are, standing barefoot on the Earth or connected to the Earth, you are collecting electrons that came from the sun.
The problem arises when we don't have negative charge. We need grounding just as we need air and we need sunshine.
Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. I had to switch my audio input. So let's tie it all together. The average person today doesn't get enough exposure to the Earth's surface. So we have a modern day problem of inflammation. A disruptive electromagnetic field is inflammation. So essentially, that's sort of how I see PEMF being. It's a modern tool for our modern disconnected dilemma. When we walk around with upwards of 20 volts on our body because of the phones that we have in our hands and the technology that we use throughout the day, and then we don't have a contact with the Earth's surface to kind of dissipate that excess voltage that we're carrying on our bodies, that's where we run into trouble. So we disrupt our electromagnetic field, which doesn't allow our bodies to do what they're designed to do. So our cells are depleted of energy, they're overly charged, and it leaves us, as we know, susceptible to all sorts of things. So a good thing to ask in the center, if it comes up in conversation, is like, when is the last time you stood with your bare feet on the Earth's surface? And this is a good way to kind of target who may be a good candidate for PEMF or even biocharger. They kind of have, as we know, the biocharger also has that voltage element. So a lot of the same energy frequencies are being transmitted through both of the technologies. So if there's someone who, like myself, lives in downtown Phoenix, there's not a lot of grass. There's not a lot of Earth's surface actually exposed, and it's not easy to get to. So if you have a busy professional who can't even remember the last time they were able to get their bare feet on some grass, they may be a good candidate to try the PEMF, because chances are their electromagnetic field is way off. So we know that when batteries are low on charge, they perform short of their potential. Similarly, biological cells that are low on charge will also exhibit dysfunction. Much like rechargeable batteries for cell phones, laptops, and cars, biological cells can also be recharged to function optimally. We can also expect that just as some rechargeable batteries hold their charge less as they age, the duration or impact of recharging biological cells will vary from one cell to cell and one individual to the next. So a little bit of science. Of course, the most digestible way to explain the technology of PEMF is that we're supercharging our cells so that our cells have more energy, therefore giving all the cells of all of our different systems more energy to optimally do what they need to do. However, it's not, of course, not as simple as that. So here's just a little bit of like what's actually happening. So there's a TRPC1 protein that is vital in the process of using PEMF. So PEMF helps orient this protein so that it can better facilitate the movement of calcium ions into the cell. So we kind of have this like cascade of events happening. We have this protein being facilitated so that it can get calciums moving into the cell. Inside the cell, calcium ions are doing three beneficial things for us. Firstly, it's getting to the mitochondria, which in turn makes it respire more. Secondly, it aids in the production of another protein, which supports the immune system. And lastly, it stimulates epigenetic cascades that support production of mitochondria. So what does this mean? You have more mitochondria available, and each is respiring more, thereby generating more ATP and energy for the cell to do its job. The central impact of PEMF is moving calcium ions and stimulating mitochondrial respiration and reproduction, leading to greater energy. So to sort of digest that, you can look at it in terms of like if you were to draw out a graph linearly. We have the protein being facilitated, we have calcium ions moving into the cell, and when that happens, we have more mitochondria being reproduced. Those mitochondria that are being reproduced are now respiring more, and that is what is ultimately leading to the up level of energy in our cells.
I want to add one thing to that, Melissa,
Sure.
which is
Yeah.
kind of an interesting piece. I'm reading a book by a scientist, and the entire book is all about mitochondria. So as you guys know, some of the basics like mitochondria respires, like the respiration is the process of making energy. When your cells have energy, they do their job, and every cell in your body has a different job to do. A lot of times we talk about this with red light because we talk about the collagen production, and people are typically interested in that because they want healthier, more youthful looking skin. But there's a lot of things that we do, whether it's the food we eat, the nutrients, the vitamins, and all of these wonderful things that we have available to us, especially in today's age. I mean, we live in the generation of like supplementation, right? But your body's able to make this ATP energy. But what happens if your body's making all of this ATP energy that you don't need, or should I say you don't use? And what happens is when you don't use energy because you're not moving enough, you're not walking enough, you're not exercising enough, you're being too stagnant, right? We tend to get into those habits of like grinding on the computer all day long, just using a lot of mental energy. What happens is the cells leak. They leak free radicals. And when they leak these free radicals, this excess energy, they basically destroy stuff in our body. And the difference between a bird and a mouse, like a bird lives a lot longer than a mouse. And the real reason for that is because a mouse leaks a hell of a lot of energy compared to the bird for some reason. So, just in cleaning up this process of like making more energy is so important, but it's like equally important to use the energy as well. is what I'm learning. So I just wanted to add to that. So thanks, Melissa.
Yeah, thank you. So this slide is going to help us understand why it is helpful to use PEMF when someone has suffered an injury. So lab tests were performed on rats that concluded that PEMFs improve blood flow, enhance oxygen consumption, and boost ATP production by facilitating electron transport. So again, we keep hearing this like movement of electrons, and that's like the common theme of what's actually happening when we're sitting on this machine is we're creating movement of these electrons to be, either the calcium ions moving to the cells or what it is, but we're getting stagnant things moving into the cells. And so by doing so, they may also increase skeletal muscle cellular energy potential. And it's quoted down here, PEMFs increase heat-independent blood flow to skeletal muscle after treatment. So that is why if we have better blood flow to our muscles after treatment and we have an injury, that's a good thing. That's going to help us recover faster. Increased blood flow like that during exercise enhances nutrient delivery and facilitates gas exchange in active or injured tissues. So a good takeaway here is if somebody in the center is working on, let's say they sprained their ankle and they're trying to heal that a little bit faster, you can speak to the PEMF not just on a general level that it's going to help boost recovery, but why. We know that PEMF is going to improve blood flow, which is going to enhance nutrient delivery to the area, which is then going to boost ATP production and then help those muscle tissues heal faster. So what is PEMF? It's a holistic supplement that infuses the body with natural energy at the cellular level. These are the bullet points that we keep in the center. Great for speaking to who it may be good for and what you may experience during a session. But we're really looking at the regenerative processes of the cells. We're creating more mitochondria, they're respiring more, and we're getting more energy in our cells. So we're going to move into some practical applications of actually using the PEMF so that hopefully by the end of this presentation, we all feel a little bit more comfortable on how to use the chair and use the accessories based on, kind of like the hot spots that our members may be pointing out to us. So firstly, the direction of the magnetic field matters. If you guys slide over to that third image, if we are using an attachment and we're hitting one spot and we're not sandwiching the body, we're going to have those blue facing sides facing the same way. So both are going to face the body. However, if we are sandwiching the body, so in the fourth image there, we have the hand in between the paddles. In that case, we're going to have the smooth blue surface continuing to face in the same direction with the body part in between. And there's going to be some other cases where this is not true, but in this case, we're creating the push-pull effect when we're sandwiching the body in that way. So here's two examples that have different applications. So imagine you have somebody sitting in the PEMF chair. They're sitting in the chair, so the chair is plugged in, and then we're going to use the square pad. So we have two modes of applying the PEMF. My little smiley faces are your person, and the arrows are where the smooth blue side are facing. So when using the chair and the square pad, we want the smooth blue facing in the same direction. So that person sitting on the chair, of course, the smooth blue is facing out. That's what they're sitting on. And then that square pad, the smooth blue would also be facing out. So the blue would not be touching the person's body. It would be so if I was standing in front of the person sitting on the chair, I would be able to see that blue surface. So they're facing in the same direction. Really important, because if we don't do this, the electromagnetic field cancels each other out and then there's no field created. If we go over to the second example here, using the square pad and the paddle or ring, either or, it doesn't matter, we have a different scenario. So the person again is sitting in the chair, but we don't have the chair plugged in. Instead, we have the square pad, and maybe that's on the low back, and then we're utilizing the paddles or the rings as well. In this case, we want the smooth blue surface of both to be facing the body. So try to envision that. You're sitting on the chair with maybe the square pad on your low back, so that the smooth blue of the square pad is touching your low back. And then perhaps we have the paddles on, like the image before, on our wrist. Those paddles will then be facing the body if they're stacked on top of each other, facing the body. So it's kind of intuitive, it makes sense when you break it down, but it's just good to kind of highlight that the applications are different depending on what you're actually using.
So if you were using, like, say, a knee, and maybe somebody had a paddle like underneath the knee and then a paddle like over the knee, you would have the blue facing each other?
Yeah, we're gonna go over that. I actually have a good visual for that. Good question. Let me skip to it since we're on that. So here is an example of what you're saying, but there's two different ways to do this. This way, we're sandwiching the knee. So when we're sandwiching the knee, we want the blue facing side to face in the same direction when we sandwich that body part. However, if we were stacking these and the paddles were together and then we were applying it to the body, they would be just stacked together. They'd still be facing the same way, but then the blue would be touching the body. Does that make sense? So the smooth blue surfaces of both paddles would still be facing in the same direction. However, you wouldn't apply the stacked paddles with the black side facing the body. You would, of course, turn them to face the body.
So the blue always faces the body, basically.
The blue always, no, the blue does not always face the body. In this situation, where we're using this chair and the square pad is not facing the body. Because if it did, it would cancel each other out with it being with the chair.
Got it.
So when do we determine what is best to use, like having them face the same direction or sandwich?
It's not a determination on your part. It's based on creating the push-pull effect and not canceling each other out. So
Melissa, so for most of the way, if you're just doing one pad or one paddle, you have them facing the same direction always, right? And
So-
if you combine the double things with the single, then it changes it.
yeah, so let's simplify this. Let's look at this image. Do you see how this woman, using either the rings in the first three images, the rings or the paddle, she has them stacked, right? So her body is not in between the paddles or the rings. She has them stacked, and then she's applying them to either her chest or her knee or her hip. You see that? The blue sides are facing the same way, and then she has the blue turned towards her body. Okay, so that's the only distinction we're trying to make here. When you're stacking them, you still have the blue sides facing in the same direction, but then you're going to turn it into the body so that the blue is actually pulsing into the body. Where it changes a little bit is if you put your limb in between the paddles in that fourth image. Then you only have one blue side touching the skin, and the top paddle, the black side, is actually touching the skin, because you need to have the blue surfaces facing in the same direction.
Because that's the direction of the energy. That's the direction of the energy is flowing.
Exactly. So hopefully that helps clear up some of those questions. In both scenarios, we have the smooth blue facing the same direction. It's just how it's applied. Okay. We can come back to that if there's any confusion still. So there are some, based on kind of like what we see people coming in and kind of complaining about, we have a lot of low back, sometimes we have shoulder. I have some examples here of ways to utilize different accessories to kind of hit those hot spots that people are needing some help with. So while the square pad may be used to pulse the lumbar region, the paddles, they actually provide a more focused pulsing on the sides of the lower back. So the diagram you see here, you can swing it so that they stay put. You can swing the straps over the shoulder, and then you're just going to place those paddles in the low back area, one on each side. And of course, the blue is going to be facing the body. We want the pulse to go into that lumbar region. So that's if we're just using the paddles. So if you have someone come in, they got some low back tightness, maybe some inflammation, they tweaked it. This is a great way to really target the lumbar region by utilizing just those paddles. So you'd put in just the paddles and then you'd block out that second channel with the black plug and just target those paddles. We looked at the knee before. There's a couple ways you can do the knee. Again, we're looking at an example where you're sandwiching the body. So you have the blue smooth side facing the same direction. They're both facing either to the left, both facing to the right, or both facing up. You can hit it from the anterior posterior, which is the first image. Okay, so we're hitting like the back side and the front side, in other words, or the medial and lateral, which is like left to right. And something that I learned that I wasn't doing until I kind of looked more into it is the compression of this is really important. So you can see how it's like really strapped around this woman's knee. It's tight. So when you're applying like the paddles or the rings to an area like this, you want to make sure you're using the strap and applying compression so that these paddles are tight around the knee. You don't want them loose. Here's a shoulder example. This is a comfortable way as well. The rings kind of sit nicely in that area. The paddles can also be used, but the rings kind of fit a little bit nicer there and they're a little bit more targeted. In this example, you can guess the way that the ring in the back is facing. It should be facing the same way we see the one in the front. So blues are facing in the same direction because we're sandwiching the shoulder. And here's another example for the elbow. Same idea, the same theme is playing out. If we're sandwiching a body part, we have the smooth blue facing in the same direction. And again, you can see there how the black strap at the bottom of the rings is tied really tight because that is now applying this like squeezing pressure to keep those rings really tight around the elbow. So you can either wrap it around the actual ring or paddle itself, or in some cases like this, it makes more sense to tighten the ropes right leading up to the ring so that that's nice and tight, and then you can just squeeze that elbow in there and it can sit in there nicely. And the last one that looked really interesting to me for low back is called the taco position. In this situation, both the chair and the square pad are plugged in. So we're getting pulsing from both. And another example of how the smooth blue is facing in the same direction. The chair pad facing out and the square pad facing out. You're gonna bend the square pad right along the middle where the seam is and have the person sit down. What this is doing is it's amplifying the pulse because the most concentrated pulse is coming from where those seams intersect, right in the very middle of the square pad. So with the chair and the square pad pulsing this region, I put a little caution there. You have to take this one really slow, especially if someone has an injury there. It could be like a micro movement and they already feel it. So if you utilize this setup, just make sure that you take the dial as you start turning it up. Just take that really slow. Pulsing the pathway. This kind of gets a little bit advanced, but I wanted to put it here anyway. It uses like the same theory as when we talk about like meridians and acupuncture and other Eastern medicine. It's essentially saying that while someone might have a hot spot, meaning like they actually feel a symptom of pain, let's say in their the back of their neck or their hand, let's say they have pain in their hand, pulsing the pathway means like if we understand the meridians of the body, we could pulse that person's neck because that meridian is connected. So like I said, it's a little bit advanced, but it was part of the training and I thought it was interesting. So if you happen to have a really good grasp on the meridians of the body, you could get fancy with this and pulse the pathway instead of just pulsing the hot spots, understanding that when we do so, we're affecting the whole channel. So here's a couple of quick tips. Let's look at the key first. Pulses per second. When you put someone on PEMF and you're just getting them started, so the dial is turned all the way down, the pulses are really high, right? So you have pulses coming in one after the other really quickly. This is pulses per second. How many times you're hearing or feeling that pulse. And then we have magnetic field strength, which is how much juice is behind that pulse or how strong that pulse is. So depending on what our clients are looking for, there's two ways we can play with this information. If we're looking to relax, maybe someone's coming in the evening, they need some help sleeping tonight while they're, they don't want to be juiced up. You're going to want to utilize a high pulse per second and a low magnetic field strength. It's a lot easier than it sounds because when you manipulate one, the other one automatically follows. So when you turn that machine on, you have a lot of pulses per second, which means that automatically the magnetic field strength is very low. So we want to utilize those early outputs in the machine for someone who's looking to relax, meaning we're not going to turn it up very high because we're going to want to keep those pulses per second high and the field strength low. On the other hand, if we're looking for more energy, we're going to want to turn that up more. So the more we turn that dial, our pulses per second are going to slowly decrease, right? So we're going to go from really quick, low strength pulses. And as we keep turning, those pulses per second are going to space out. And they're spacing out because the juice coming behind each pulse is increasing. So we're getting more energy or more pulse coming through as they space out. So if someone's looking for increased energy, we're going to want to encourage them to continue to turn that dial up until they're getting that really strong magnetic field strength and the pulses are really spaced out. So there's a couple resources that I'd like to turn you guys on to as we continue to get better at understanding all of these therapies. This first one I haven't read myself, but it comes really highly recommended. It is on my list, so I plan to get to it. But if you guys haven't heard of this or haven't checked it out, it's a really great book. The quote here I think is really cool. With enough voltage and raw materials, the body can heal almost anything. So if you guys want to take note of that, write that down, feel free.
The raw materials, by the way, are the nutrients and the oxygen. Those two coming together is essentially what the cells need to, the mitochondria needs to respire and create that energy. So just keep that in mind. And then obviously the voltage being an important factor in ensuring that the cells have enough voltage to make that process function normally.
And the last resource, we talked about it earlier in the presentation, is the Earthing movie. It just does a really good job of breaking down the idea of not only our bodies being like batteries, but the earth being like batteries. And when you can draw those parallels and understand the negative and the positive and how those two things are at interplay, I personally felt that it was really helpful for me to digest kind of the concepts that we're talking about when it comes to creating an electromagnetic field. So if you guys haven't checked this out yet, I highly, highly recommend it. It really helped me kind of understand this whole concept of pulsed electromagnetic field therapy. So we're going to move into a little quiz. So we're going to go into this next, oh, sorry, I have one more slide and then we're going to do a little quiz. So goal for next 30 days. Let's get more people on PEMF and biocharger. And we were just talking about flow of the center session and getting new people through in an hour session. You know, when we're utilizing our time the right way, we are getting people to try some of these add-on services as part of their first session, because then it helps us make that sale, that sale that includes maybe red light or something else when they go to buy a membership. So I encourage you guys, if you fall into conversation with somebody who gives you any of the hints below who our candidates might be for this machine, comp them, try to comp at least one session to someone who hasn't tried it per shift. I think that's a really doable goal. You know, we work about 6 to 7 hours on a shift. If you can get at least one person every time to try it, get them on there, I think that would be a good way to start getting more people exposed to the therapy. And who are our best candidates? Busy professionals who aren't getting outside enough. So remember, they may be carrying around a lot of voltage, which means their electromagnetic field therapy is way off, and we want to counteract that. People who take meetings on the go, utilizing their phones and other technology all day. Again, field is probably way off, carrying around a lot of inflammation. Anyone recovering from an injury, we know that it's going to help them get more blood flow, enhanced oxygen consumption to those injured tissues. So we want to promote that. And then any athletes or fitness enthusiasts who are looking to recover faster for the same reasons as above. All right, so we will now move into a little test your knowledge section. Hopefully this will help us bring home all the information we've just taken in. And I'm going to go around, and I don't even know who's still on this call. Hopefully everybody is. And see if we can get 100% on each question. So first question, finish this sentence. If our cells have enough electrical charge, the body will what? Alejandra, if you are on the call.
She's off.
She's off. George, if our cells have enough electrical charge, the body will what?
Leave, reproduce, or split?
We're talking about the body. So
Oh,
not the cells, the body.
the body will heal?
Yes, exactly. The body will heal itself. So remember, if we're putting our bodies in prime advantageous states, there's not a lot we have to do. The body can heal itself. Next one, fill in the blank. The surface of the earth carries a what charge? Jeanette.
Electromagnetic charge?
A or B, positive or negative?
Positive or negative? Negative ions are bad in. If we're too charged, then we want to be grounded. So it's no
Right.
negative.
Exactly. Yeah. So we already carry a lot of positive charge. And what happens when we don't connect with the Earth's surface is that we don't have an ability to dissipate some of that. And the Earth's surface carries that naturally negative charge. All right, next one. Science tells us that PEMF helps orient the TRPC1 protein so that calcium ions move into the cell. The benefit of this movement, A, leads to more mitochondria availability. B, promotes greater mitochondrial respiration. C, leads to more ATP production and energy for the cell to do its job. Or D, all of the above. May.
I would have to say D.
You would be correct. All of those things are happening. Good work. Next one. PEMF was shown to have multiple positive effects on lab rats due to the facilitation of electron transport. Name one benefit that was discovered during the research performed on rats. Brady.
More mitochondrial respiration.
Yes, boost in ATP production. If you had said any of these, they would have been correct. So remember on that screen, we were talking about why it might be good for someone who has sustained an injury. We have improved blood flow, carrying more nutrients to those muscle tissues. enhanced oxygen consumption, and of course, boost in ATP production. That answer will always be correct. Next one, fill in the blank. When pulsing using just the paddles on either side of a member's knee, the smooth blue surfaces should A, face in the same direction, or B, face inward towards the body. Cheryl.
Be inward towards the body.
Technically, they're both right, but what we were going for is that they're facing in the same direction. So you wouldn't want them canceling each other out. So in the image we looked at prior, when we have the knee sandwiched by the paddles, technically only one of the paddles is facing inward towards the body. The other one is actually the black side is facing towards the body. If you guys can envision that image again. So it's
so
kind
the
of
difference. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
So the difference between the two would be sandwich would be facing the same direction.
Mm-hmm.
No, sandwich. Yeah, sandwich would be facing the same direction, and stack would be the inward, right?
Correct. Exactly. That was the distinction we were going for. Awesome. Let's go to the next one. Fill in the blank. When pulsing using just the rings on either side of a member's shoulder, the smooth blue surfaces should A, face in the same direction, or B, face inward towards the body. Jesse.
They would face in the same direction.
That is correct. So same exact scenario as the one before. We have them facing in the same direction so that we create that push-pull effect in between the paddles of the rings coming through that member's body part. Next one, fill in the blank. When pulsing using the square pad and the low back and the rings on the ankle, the smooth blue surfaces should A, face in the same direction, or B, face inward toward the body. Kelsey.
Sorry, face in the same direction.
So this one is going to be face inward toward the body. So let's try to envision our client. We have the square pad. We're laying on the square pad on our low back. And we have the rings I should have had stacked on the ankle.
Oh, that's why I was confused too. Yeah, because if you had them sandwiched, everything would face in the same direction, but.
Right. What I was trying to highlight is that we're using different elements. So all the blue surfaces in this situation would be facing the body because we're not using the chair. Really, it's when the chair is in play. It's a little bit easier, but if we're using two separate attachments, we have the square pad facing the body because we're laying on it. And then we have the rings laying on the ankle.
Gotcha. If you did sandwich the ankles, then, all right, that's what I thought it was saying. So I get it, what you're saying.
Yep. Sorry about that. Fill in the blank. Pulsing at a high PPS and a low MFS is beneficial for what? Michael.
The high PPS, which is like the high pulses per second, that's going to be for relaxation. And the low MFS is beneficial for like increased energy.
Well, they're the same. So you were right the first time. You could once you adjust the
PPS. Got it.
Low
MFS, meaning like it's like a low magnetic charge, low energy.
Exactly. So once you adjust the pulses per second, the MFS automatically follows.
Got it.
And MFS again is magnetic field strength. So you were right, promoting a feeling of relaxation.
In the unit higher than us, the most expensive one that they make, you have dials for each of these things, where we just have one dial. So if you turn it down weak, it's a high PPS, low MFS, and vice versa. But
right. So our last one, just to tie it all together, pulsing at a low PPS, so low pulses per second, and a high magnetic field strength is beneficial for what, George?
You're on mute, George, just a heads up.
Oh, thank you. Pulsing at the low PPS and the high MSS, that's where it's like the shorter bursts at higher power, right?
Yep.
That would be better for healing, for promoting healing.
Healing, yeah, but in contrast to relaxation, what might you think we're getting if we're gonna go on the other end of the spectrum? If we're not relaxing, we're getting more what?
Stimulated.
Yeah, more energy, promoting a feeling of enhanced energy.
Okay.
That's it.
Quick question, did they go into any details when you're doing the training on like when to use the higher signal strength versus the lower PPS, like types of injuries?
When it comes to injuries, the general recommendation is pulsing at that 8 out of 10, 7 out of 8, 7 or 8 out of 10 on that intensity scale. But really they keep it like it's very client specific. So what each person feels, especially with an injury, sometimes like I've barely turned the knob and they're like, okay, that I can't do anymore, that's enough. And ultimately you don't want the person tensed up. So as long as the more you can give them and they can remain relaxed and just receive, is better. But in terms of like if it's high or low PPS, it's going to be so different from person to person. But you want to use that 1 out of 10 like rating of perceived output, and let them dictate when they're there.
Melissa, can I add something really quickly that just I think is really important, is that the pulse doesn't have to be used during the person's session. So just a reminder that they could book their pulse outside of their center session. And in fact, if they're dealing with an injury, the recommended time is to actually do this for full hour rate. And Michael, kind of to your question, and Melissa's right on point, but when you have an hour session, they recommend starting at a lower, higher PPS, so weaker, and then finishing weaker, and then doing like the high strength in the middle. They also recommend starting on the full body pad, the chair pad, in the beginning and end, and then hitting the target spot in the middle, because you'll end up getting a lot of the pathways for that middle pad. That's one of the reasons, and I'd be curious what Melissa thought. I see like some members like, and maybe our staff likes splitting the chair pad and the chair pad and the square pad, one on the feet, one on the body. I really don't like that because I feel like there's not much of the legs getting that second half of the energy. So I'd rather combine them together or just have the chair pad by itself. In most cases, of course, everybody's different, if somebody likes feeling a little pulse, but you're giving half the energy to just like a little bit. If somebody's got some things in their feet they're working on, then that might be good, but just throw that out there. Curious to what you think, Melissa.
Yeah, great point. There's a much better way to hit the legs. You want to think about like how much surface area does the square pad take up, and then how much of that person's body is touching it? Not much. So a lot of it is just like kind of like not being absorbed by the body. So if the person is concerned about like their legs not getting the pulse, I would much rather like grab the paddles and put them like on the quads or under the calves so that they're actually getting that pulse versus just like having the square pad laying on that footrest and, like maybe just your ankles are touching it.
And if you have that square pad, but you're also using the main seat pad, then you're going to have the blue facing the body, right? As if you're being sandwiched by the blue of the pad and the blue of the square, or the blue is going to be facing outward.
Outward.
So same thing as sandwiching anything, energy's always going one way.
Exactly.
That really helped me clear that up, Melissa, because I was confused between the one situation where you do have them facing each other, which is the double pads, and the other pad, right? I was confused. Now I get it. That one. too.
Yeah, the way they laid it out was not super intuitive, but the takeaway is that if you ever have a person's body or body part in between where the pulse is coming from, so that could be the chair and the square pad, that could be 2 rings, 2 paddles, it doesn't matter. If the person is like sandwiched between where the pulses are coming from, you're always gonna have the smooth blue facing in the same direction. The only time you're gonna really change that is if you're using 2 paddles or 2 rings and they're stacked, and we're just gonna apply them to like the ankle or the chest. We have those stacked rings or paddles. We're gonna apply those directly to the body so the blue will face the body.
Got it.
Yeah.
Outstanding. I'm going to stop recording